welcome to another episode of the Mindset RX podcast. My name is Tom Foxley and I help functional athletes gain the champ's mindset. On today's show, you're about to hear a discussion with the one and only pioneer of all things fear and psychology and just so many other things and life in general, I'd like to say, Tony Blauer. If you haven't heard Tony speak before, he's got a myriad of podcasts available and he's done an interview with me before, but just definitely check out his work as a whole. I think it's a really good conversation, not just because I'm in it, but because Tony really enlightens me and he's really kind of pushed me along in so many ways recently. And because of this, the work with the athletes I'm working with has thrived, and not only that, but my whole life has thrived as a direct response from his work. So enjoy the conversation. If you love it, please go to iTunes, leave 5-star review and all that kind of jazz, and I'll see you on the other side. So Tony, welcome back.
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Good to be here.
Great, thank you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. You know, it's a beautiful California morning and already up early and looking forward to this talk. Getting ready to go to Australia again. So busy, man.
Good, man. Australia's going to be super exciting. I think that this call, as we were speaking about before, and just to kind of fill the listeners in, came about when we started talking about fear in another way. And I had this big realization. I think I was working with 6 or 7 athletes at the time who had all expressed fear in very different ways. Whether that was a kind of very obvious way, like I'm scared of getting injured, I'm scared of being humiliated, or whether it's something that when I look through there, for example, I do this exercise called Learning Your Language, where we look back through, like we try and bring the subconscious story up to the surface, and it's exactly the same thing. It was like fear of humiliation, fear of failure, fear of injury, like all these things kept on coming up. So let's start off by saying, or just touching on recapping how you work with fear, and then going in a bit more detail after that.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was just looking, and I just see it everywhere. I was just looking at one of our messages, when we were organizing this, and, you know, you wrote, "I'm afraid Tuesday won't work." That just jumped out at me. Like, the fear is everywhere.
The irony.
I'm afraid that Tuesday won't work for our call. You know, it's funny because, how we talk to ourselves really impacts, you know, what our next decision is, what we're going to think about. And so many years ago, I decided that what was more important was understanding the psychology of fear, less the biology or biochemistry of fear. And most people focus and fixate on the physiological changes. I got butterflies in my stomach. I'm sweating. I hate when I breathe like this, you know, and I must be afraid. But they're focusing on the physiological part. Now, the physiological part is almost, it's already happened because something else happened, right? If there wasn't a stimulus first, you wouldn't get, you know, you're driving along, you're speeding, and all of a sudden, you know, you see a cop's lights flashing and you get an immediate adrenaline dump, right? You're out of breath a little bit, like, oh shit, your breathing's changed, but you're sitting in your car, you're not moving, you're not doing anything physical, but your whole physiological change. And then he whips by you and you realize he's going to another call. Like, the stimulus has to happen first for it to trigger this physiological emotion. So if we can get ahead of that, right? And this was all part of my intuition, you know, working in my laboratory. It was, of course, combatives, defensive tactics, self-defense. But what I would guide people to be specific to your question is, like, you know, how do I look at fear and get people to look at fear is to actually look at it literally in terms of sequences, stimulus, response. What happened before I got this physiological response, or I need to do something. And then when you start to look at it like that, it removes it somewhat, it removes it from more of an emotional perspective. And now you're looking at it kind of like this chronology. It's a story. It's almost like a puzzle, right? And so, and hopefully your listeners are digging this, is like, if you visualize it like a puzzle, then you go, I'm just going to focus on this piece. And if I can get this piece together, that will change, how the next piece fits in. And that's what we tell people, every day we're faced with some sort of stimulus that becomes a confrontation for us. So how we handle the stimuli or the stimulus of that day actually impacts the quality of the week. And if you intuit the algorithm, suddenly that knowledge impacts the quality of your life.
Nice. I love the way you use the phrase algorithm for so many reasons, but mainly because it makes it such an objective thing. And I think that with human nature, I think that the temptation is to kind of experience things and live whatever that is, and to be in that fear state or whatever the emotion is. And the steps that you're describing there, I think is a way to withdraw from experiencing it and begin observing it. And I think that's the important step there, to take a step back, to get the perspective.
You brought up something really interesting, because what you just described is the scariest fucking thing in the world for people, right? You said, hey, step back, detach yourself, observe your life, right? And then make like that sounds so simple, but that's scary. Mm-hmm. Right. And so now what are we back at? We're back at fear again. And that's why I say fear throttles everything everybody does in their life. And when you understand that, it's, I think I might have said this on our first talk, but if we didn't fear fear, what would we do? If we didn't fear fear, what would we try? Yeah. We make a joke, both of us are deeply involved with athletes in the fitness industry. And I think I use this metaphor, you can watch a good athlete warming up with a PVC pipe and you go, wow, nice mobility, nice technique, good neuromuscular communication. Look at that nice snatch. And then the bar, they move to the bar, beautiful form, get some weight. And then when they're in and about, like just below their PR range, the form starts to change. Mm-hmm. And then when they think they're going for that PR, the form changes again. And but nothing's changed in their biomechanic structure. Nothing's changed in the lift or the movement. What's now changed is their mindset. This is getting heavy. I am scared of failing, performance anxiety, or I'm scared of this dropping on my head, which is a good fear, right? But it's nothing you can change other than the greatest athletes find that what has now become commonly referred to as the flow or the Zen state, but it's interesting. The path, like if you want to have flow or get in the zone, you need to let go of certain shit and just be Zen about it. But that the hack to that is understanding fear.
Yeah, and understanding yourself and seeing it objectively. I think that one of the points you brought up really nicely there is like that people initially, if they're kind of an over feeler, it's they are seeing the first layer. And it's like, okay, so what's the trigger behind that? What's the stimulus? It's like the brilliant Viktor Frankl quote of between stimulus and response, there's a space, and within that space, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Like learning to own that space, own that gap, and is the process of becoming a better athlete, is the process of mastering a mindset. But to do that, we have to understand the stimulus better, which is the fear, and that's the beautiful link.
Yeah, and it's a tricky thing, because there's where you decide to focus changes your situational awareness for other things that can guide you or teach you. So once you've established your paradigm, so you decide, no, this is where I need to look, or this is where I need to look. And I always talk about when I'm teaching people about self-protection and safety, and everyone around the world agrees that situational awareness is huge. But I always talk about self-awareness as the lens that improves situational awareness. That if you don't have self-awareness, you're not aware of a bias, of a prejudice, of an internal fear, that's going to change what you look at and what you deem relevant to you, whether it's your safety or whether it's how you handle a competition or business deal, a relationship. Self-awareness is everything. And the only way to cultivate deeper self-awareness is to understand how to manage fear.
Nice. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think the more I look at fear as well, the more I see it's so much more fundamental on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like that's if you look at the very base of it, it's safety and belonging. And especially when it comes to female athletes that I work with, or females in general, I find that fear of not belonging is increased like tenfold. And when we really dial down to it, that's where the comparison comes in, because what if I'm not accepted into this community? And it happens with guys as well, but it's just less obvious. Right. And like the belonging is big, and the safety as well. Like, am I safe in this environment? And that's why it's so scary going into a new box, why it's so scary going into a new facility, why it's so scary going into a competition. And that's so this is basically a very elongated way of saying thank you for pointing out the insignificance of fear to me, because it's changed not only my view, but my athletes kind of.
It's everything, man. Hey, listen, like I've been talking about fear and managing fear and differentiating between the physiology and the psychology of fear for 30 years. How old are you now?
I am 26.
Right. So you weren't even born. Right. And so, but my reason, what I'm saying is like, I'm glad that you got it, because a lot of people hear this stuff and they're like, blah, 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 psychobabble, and you got it. And what it's done is, I mean, you were already incredibly passionate, the first time we talked, but it's fun to see. And I see it in your posts, in your memes, because it's a deeper essence. It's understanding, it's like when I, one of my interviews with my good friend Brian McKenzie, and we were talking about all the research he's been doing on breathing. And here I am, like a martial artist for, over 40 years. I've developed an anaerobic capacity in high stress situations that I somewhat take for granted. And I never thought about, of course I knew breathing exercise and stuff like that. But when I would do scenarios, if I did like a multiple assailant scenario and there's 3 guys in gear and I'm in gear and we're beating the fucking shit out of each other, like most people would be like in the fetal position in 10 seconds, because the physiological stimuli and the impact on their breathing. And I just had somebody talk to me about this. He said, man, I was really in good shape. And here I am, like in the first round doing some sparring, and like, I'm done. He said the stress of it was so much. And this, an interesting thing is you can't transfer, skill set and experience, like what you've learned as a swimmer doesn't mean you're a good cyclist, right? Like you just can't, there's an adaptation that you got to get used to this stuff. But one of the things that's so subtle that people don't understand is how fear and this unconscious concern of how you're going to perform, how long does this go for, how much is it going to hurt. When you're thinking about now, there's certain, like special athletes, whether it's a Froning or an Annie or a Fraser or whatever, that either don't even care about the pain, they just accept it. But that was, nobody just is born that way. That was cultivated. And that's what some of the rest of us mortals who look at, whether it's a Wayne Gretzky or a Beckham in his prime, or a, Pele or a Froning or whatever. And we sit there in awe, but we don't understand that their adaptations and what made them the genius they are in their sport, they weren't just born with it. There's research. If you ever read The Talent Code, there's evidence that something created that adaptation at a young age. And so, but listen, for us, and this is where I'm going with this, is if I look at somebody's performance or movement, whether it's, public speaking or athletics or whatever, and I go, wow, that was beautiful. How do I get there? The answer I get is going to trigger a fear in me of, am I willing to do that work? Mm-hmm. Am I willing to replicate that or put in the time to get it? And so, this is a tangent and a rant. Most people don't want to look at themselves deeply, right? As I identified earlier, that's the scariest thing in the world is like, I want to develop self-awareness because I'll, hey, let's self-actualize more today. Like people don't think that way. And then fundamentally, especially this generation, we're fucking lazy. I'm like, oh my God, my LTE internet is so slow today. Like, why is Facebook taking so long to open? Right? Like we are so used to things happening. What is like every promotion online is like, hey, in 3 weeks you will have this and
fear of missing out. Yeah.
Right. But it's the hack generation. Yeah. And I don't mean hack in that sense is like the quick fix, immediate gratification. So sorry for the rant.
No, that's a great rant. And you brought up a really nice point actually, and more of just a kind of an observation of carrying for like principles. I've spoken about intensity tolerance, and that's one of the main reasons people decide to work for me, because they want to learn how to embrace intensity and not freak out under pressure.
Right.
And the very baseline of where we start, I have this pyramid. It's like the like before we get to self-talk, before we get into like your I don't know whether that's a word, manipulatable factors, you know the word. Right. Before you get to those factors, the factors you can control is familiarity. And if you're unfamiliar with that, why would, like, as an evolutionary strategy, why would they say, oh, this is a new stimulus, let's be fine with it. Your body's going to be completely kind of like, what the fuck's going on? And so is your psychology. And I noticed exactly the same thing, even going from something that feels very similar and looks very similar, like going from gi jiu-jitsu to no gi jiu-jitsu. There's the lack of familiarity with that thing, and that stimulates fear. It stimulates, and like what I refer to as bound nature in when I work with my clients, bound nature being anything that's non-serving in the pursuit of who you want to be. So it's really interesting to see the trigger of fear. And like, I just love the way you bring it up, and yeah, this is a great way to look at things.
Thank you. One of the things that I try to do and try to inspire in others is let's not mystify life any more than it is. It's already pretty mysterious. And what I found, certainly in my industry and community, and even in, like, I'm not a neuroscience scientist, I'm not a psychologist, but I've educated neuroscientists and educated psychologists. And I don't mean that I'm not trying to sound like, oh, I did this. What I mean is, like, I've lectured at hospitals where, it's the, like all the psychologists in this department there, bring me in to listen to my thoughts on fear. And that blows my mind. And I'll tell you this, what was interesting is I went to at a very famous hospital in Canada and had 12 of the, top psychiatrists and psychologists at the hospital for the seminar. And I was going to talk on fear. And guess what I was feeling leading up to parking the car, walking, and I was shitting my pants, man. I was like, holy fuck. But so here's an epiphany for people is here I am, researched all this shit that on fear, and I still feel fear. How is that possible? Because that is the message. This is about managing fear, not eradicating fear. Fear doesn't go away. You stress inoculate. It's an adaptation. The fear matures into a knowledge and a ritual. And you should always be afraid of a weight falling on you. You should always be afraid of getting run over by a car. You should always respect gravity when you're up on a ledge or a cliff or whatever. So there's no point where fear, if we reframe it, fear becomes this survival, element, like a signal where we go, oh, I should take this more seriously right now, where I need to focus on my breathing a little bit. I went off. I don't know what happened. I lost my thought on when I brought up Brian McKenzie before, because I was going through a really heavy thing last year. I got a very serious neck injury, and it killed the nerves on the left side of my face. And it triggered wicked anxiety in me, and I was having trouble, talking and speaking. There you go. Thinking, obviously, and it changed my life. And I called Brian, and he turned me on to some breathing protocols that literally within 4 days, my anxiety went away. And I'd never, public speaking, 30, 40 years, the combatives, the martial arts, like it was wrecking my life. And my epiphany from it was I'd never thought of breathing on purpose, because we take breathing for granted. And even if you like just did some sort of Metcon and you're out of breath, we don't think about breathing on purpose. It's just catch your breath. It's fall down and pant. It's, hey, don't, like if you see somebody doubled over, a coach might go, stand up, like, and he may say, it's easier to breathe than if you're doubled over. But a lot of people say, don't bend over when you're breathing like that, because of psychologically what it does to you. Mm-hmm. You look defeated, stand up, and, but we're still not getting deeper into how do you breathe? Why are you breathing? What's the count? What's it doing? And then deeply looking at, again, the self-awareness of how is my breathing pattern, which may be unique to you and different from me, impacting my physiology. Because and this is from an article I wrote in 1993 called The Theory of Presumed Compliance. And anyone can Google that. It's online. It was something I wrote for the law enforcement community. But it basically says how you think affects how you feel. How you feel affects how you think. Both influence how you move. Right? And so neuromuscular communication, before you go for a run, before you pick up the phone to call somebody, there's a thought process. And in that thought process, you can trigger fear, right? By visualizing something erroneous that involves your pain, your defeat, or whatever. An external stimulus can also do that. And then the movie starts in your head. What we need to do is add another layer there. So remember in the second paragraph in this article, Theory of Presumed Compliance, how you feel affects how you think affects how you feel, both influence how you move. What we need to add as another layer in there is how you think affects how you feel, and how you feel affects how you breathe, right? And how you think. So it's the feel and the think. But where the argument would be is it the breathing that happens first or the thinking that happens first? It doesn't matter. Obviously I have my own bias is what I think it is, but it's not. That's irrelevant if we're all on the same page going, how are we trying to improve human performance? What is relevant is that we don't eliminate part of the formula where somebody goes, no, it's all breathing. You just like the breathing will change your life. Well, I think not breathing will change your life more significantly, right? But understanding the why and the how is also part of the what.
No, of course. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a conversation with Julian Pernod not too long ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure his concept of the arch came up and both sides feeding into each other. And I think this is where people, and we had a conversation, like him and I had a conversation about this a few months ago about, for so long, we've looked at just the psychology or just the physiology. And now those both sides of the arches are feeding into each other. And I think it ultimately boils down to when we lose sight of the bigger picture, when we lose sight of nuance because of specificity, we're looking
right.
at one area, we completely miss the boat. And this is like, it's exactly the same as you get, like you mentioned the breathing side of things, but it's even in aspects of mindset. People say like, oh, just this aspect of mindset will change you, just this aspect. And when people get further and further down these rabbit holes and they completely lose sight of the big picture and what we're trying to achieve and the way that everything else plays into each other.
Yeah. Alan Watts said, if you can't meditate in a boiler room, you just can't meditate. And what he's talking about is this sort of thing. And hopefully people get the parallel or the metaphor in that, if you need to go to a retreat and turn off your phone, and sometimes that's the first step, right? You need to, break from technology and people and stuff like that to understand the technique. But if you can't reintegrate into your life, then this other process has taken over your life. And so, when I remember reading that Watts quote so many years ago, but it was like, that was profound. It's like this, if I can only do this thing here with this the universe has to unfold on my behalf in a very specific way, then I'm kind of fucked, because now I'm just waiting for like this moment in the universe. You need to be able to, and that's why years ago, like, I renamed where everyone was talking about peak performance. And you go back into my manuals, my teaching, I always said peak performance is not what you want. Because if you truly peaked, tomorrow sucks, right? What you want is performance enhancement. Every day you want to be better. And so that's the mindset as a 30-year-old athlete, 58-year-old athlete, 70-year-old athlete. If I'm thinking, oh shit, like, man, when I was 30, I could do this. Like that's a real negative mindset. And it's hard. And it's not that that people won't do that because we have memories, but it's having, again, it all comes back to the subtlety of fear management, how you look at things, and self-awareness. There's lots of days, man. Like I'm 58 and my neck and my back and my shoulder, and in any given moment, I could be going, holy shit, I'm getting old. And I think that every day, but I also check it and go, well, that's what you're doing. You're in the fear loop here. And if you want to go do your workout now, you can't be thinking about how your back felt when you were 32. You got to be scaling and modifying and just be happy you're fucking moving. Right. And that's, what I was saying earlier is that you don't get to a point where you study fear so much that you have no fear. Right. And we talked about this in the first time. The way I spell no fear for people is KNOW, fear. Right. You need to get to know fear. And that's really the way you stress inoculate and improve your life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's acceptance. And the more people try and repress any type of non-serving behavior, the more it forces back. It's the classic kind of every force has an equal and opposite reaction. Right. And like that's exactly the same with fear, with psychology, and it works really well. I think the nuance in the language that you picked up on really well in that example is there's a huge difference between negative language and non-serving language.
Right.
Actually, you're 58 years old. Your back isn't the same physiologically. Like things are very different, and it's not negative language per se, but it's definitely non-serving. It definitely doesn't help
right.
the best version of you. And I think that's where people go, oh, I'm not being negative, I'm just stating facts. Well,
right.
Yeah, you're stating facts, but it's not helping you be the best version of yourself.
Right. No, 100%. And that's so subtle. And guess what? That's self-awareness, right? Being able to, sit there and go like, why am I talking to it? Like imagine, and I don't do this enough. And this is just a reminder that we're all humans. Even the experts that are sharing what seems like incredibly insightful shit, they're still humans. And it's amazing, when you spend some time with your, with somebody that you kind of look up to, and you find out, oh shit, this guy actually has a bad temper. Or this person doesn't talk nice to his kids, or you meet somebody who has a book or a show, and that's what we think they are. I don't know if I mentioned this the first time we talked, but I wrote an article for posted on Medium, and it was, I think the title was "You're Not Your Best Selfie," and it was a reminder. It was a reminder of like how the irony of like taking more than one selfie, like because you want people to think this is what you look like, right? So I'm constantly trying to reinvent myself, and it's not a tool. It's how I've always been. I've never, one of my guys brought in some old videos that I shot like 20 years ago. And he said, hey, we got to re-release these and put these up on Vimeo and let people see this shit. And, I said, okay, do it. He said, well, let's do like a little intro to it and have you like intro why it's cool. And I was like, okay, man, like, I'm just like letting, he's my media guy, right? Okay, let's try it. And, he puts this on And I'm like looking at this stuff going, oh my God, holy shit. And what was crazy weird, because we're talking about age and stuff like that, was like I was looking at me as a 30-year-old teaching my son, who is 5 or 6, who is standing beside me in the room, who's now 26, can pick me up over his head. And, you know, like he's huge. And it was insanely surreal. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about right now, but it was just this moment. What were we talking about before that? Because I was trying to make this point about, you had brought something about age and self-awareness and whatever. I lost it there, but it was me looking at this stuff, man, like realizing, hey, look how I used to move. Look how fast I was. Look how cool that was. Look how much more hair I had, whatever. And it was humbling, man. But at the same time you go like, yeah, and that's why I talk about performance enhancement. Because if I looked at that and just went, oh, look, I PR'd back then.
Yeah.
How depressing this would be.
Yeah,
it's exactly. Like, okay, I got to go. I'm going to go do a workout. I got to kick some ass today, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I think the way you do things as well is so, like, you talk along the phrase of, or on the long lines of becoming the best version of yourself today, like just doing what you can today, and you try and become a better version of yourself every single day. And that's the process, I think, of what is a true growth mindset. Like, people can band about growth mindset the whole time, but the irony is they say things like, oh, I've got a growth mindset now. Is it fixed in that growth mindset? Is that how things evolve now? So that constant process of taking your mental pulse every single day, and okay, where am I? What's happening today? Like, and checking in, and whether you're doing that through a meditation practice, or whether you're doing it through a journaling practice, whether you're doing it whilst you're moving and sort of training, that's, I think, the key there.
Yeah, and you reminded me of what, you know, I was thinking about before, and that was this reinventing yourself and constantly reinventing yourself. And that's what triggered the thing, is when I looked at myself like 30 years ago, I went, I'm still on that path. I'm still trying, even with my art and my system, you know, we're rewriting versions of our lesson plans. I'm working with our coaches. It's never, yeah, okay, this is done next. And that's the way people got to look at life, is you got to look at it. And it comes back to one of the first things I said on the show is, you know, every day you're going to be presented with some sort of stimulus that you're just not going to be, you wish it was something else. Mm-hmm. It could be the weather. It could be the way someone talked to you. It could be traffic. And, you know, and I've been saying this for so long, you know, how you handle, you know, that confrontation in the day is going to influence how you handle confrontations during the week, during the month. And that's the algorithm for life, you know? And so it's got to be about confrontation management. It got to be about performance enhancement psychology. It was weird because that I forget where it came up, where I just said, like, you don't want to peak. I understand what people mean with, you know, at an event, I peaked. That was like, but if you look at it in terms of like more holistically, like if truly that was the best you were going to be, then what are you doing the rest of your life? Right. And so it, you know, the competition is always between you and you on the next day.
Yeah. And like, I think that's where it becomes like, we look at kind of externally motivating factors and stuff like that. But I think that's where it comes down to not only knowing yourself now, but knowing who you want to be, not what you want to achieve, not how you want to do or anything like that. But like, okay, who do I want to be? What are my core values? Like, what are the things that I believe in? What are the things that I'm trying to grow in? Because then if those core values are always present and they're always like at the top of your mind, top of the mind awareness, we can say, okay, am I living by them? And we can always live better by them. And whilst what you're able to achieve might change, who you can be is always the right type person or a better version of yourself.
Yeah. And that's good, Tom. And that's something that, you know, you kind of want that, taped to your nose, you know, this idea of really who do I want to be? And it's weird, and it's even harder these days. And I don't mean to, like, like he's the cantankerous old man criticizing this generation. That's not what it's about. Cause I've always listened, when I was 30, 40 years old, if I went to go visit my dad who lived in another country and he was at the office, I would knock on his door before I'd come in and say, and I call people my own age, sir. Like I'm not 58 I open the door for people. I hold the door. I say thank you. There are things that have changed a lot. And so I always knew what was right. And and sometimes I wonder if people know what's right. And so, if you know who you want to be, the prescription for success is fairly obvious.
Oh, yeah.
And it's that deep thinking. And it's funny. I was thinking the other day, in the last couple of years, especially like after the injury, which is now going on a year and finally starting to heal to a point where I feel 80%, 90% normal. There were things that I try to share with my kids because it really humbled me in many ways. Things that you take for granted, just smiling. I can't fucking smile properly because of the nerve damage. And so there were things I was sharing with my kids, 26, 20, 16, and they're looking at me like I'm talking fucking Latin. Like, Dad, are you okay? And I remember thinking and I'm saying things like, hey, I want you to try and embrace this and understand this because this will mean something when, in your life now. And I wish somebody had told me this when I was 26 or 20. And they're like, okay, Dad, thanks. Can you close the door? I'm watching a cartoon, whatever it is, and I'm like, and as I'm leaving, I smile to myself and I go, people tried to tell me this shit when I was 20 or 25 and 30. And I was like, what the fuck's this guy talking about? Like, okay. And that's the cliche of cliches. Yeah. Right. So I don't know if that made any sense there.
Definitely. I think it's amazing how you have to and this is the definition of a good teacher as well. It's like making sure people figure out their own lessons as well.
Right.
Just like you put you put the bait there and you guide them to the right place. And eventually, hopefully they figure it out. But man, we can especially driven people. They're the stupidest smart people I know. They're so smart, they're so intelligent, but they butt their heads up against the wall over and over again. The irony of ironies that we've got to figure out for ourselves, and we can't listen to other people and take their advice.
Well, and then that comes back to what I said earlier: is that you meet your hero and then find out that holy shit, like this guy's an asshole, or this, or that was a real pejorative example, but. This guy actually said he was hungry and had to go to the bathroom. I thought he was like immortal. And we realize that anyone listening to this, like all of us struggle with shit. Nobody has it figured out. And listen, here's the thing. If you ever meet somebody who's always in a good mood and always smiling, and you're like, what the fuck is wrong with him? Yeah. Why is he always in a good mood, that fucker? There are anomalies out there. You might meet somebody that just has everything, dialed in. Philosophically, I'm going to guess there's some area when they're sitting alone somewhere that they wish, oh fuck, but it doesn't matter. You can't compare yourself to other people. You can only use other people to inspire you and go, that's a trait that I want to understand or learn, or that's a skill set. And then you go for it, man.
Yeah. Lovely stuff. Tony, I think that's a brilliant place to end. I think that's a lovely message to end on. But before we go, make sure people know all about where they can find more about you, where they can follow your work, and any way you want to direct people at the moment.
Yeah, thanks. So our main website is Blauer, my last name, Blauer, Blauer Spear, SPEAR. And we got a bunch of websites. If you look up human weapons, if you just Google Tony Blauer, I would tell people this, the Google my cycle of behavior, where you can actually see a visual map of the neural circuitry of fear, according to how I look at it. But it'll give you some insight. It'll give you some tools, and you start to look at fear as a map, and it will illuminate and maybe inspire you to understand there's a huge difference between being late and being lost. When you're lost, you're scared shitless. When you're late, you're just a little uncomfortable, right? And the metaphor here is that if you've got a map to understand how to move through fear stages in your life, you're just late. It's just taking you longer to get to where you know you want to go, but at least you have a map. So Blauer Spear and Google me and hit me up. And I do all my own social media. I don't hire people to do that. Like I answer everything. I post everything. So if you do have a question or a thought, hit me up and tag me, and I will do my best to get back to you.
Nice. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Tom, thanks again. Great talking to you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Mindset RX podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to iTunes, leave a 5-star review. It helps other people just like you find this podcast. And I'd love to see you in my free Facebook group for functional athletes too. It's called Mindset for Functional Athletes. If you want to learn to master your mindset as an athlete, as a human being, and watch it apply to your whole life, this is the place for you. And you can find it. I'll put a link in the show notes or in the description of this podcast, but you can also find it just by going to Facebook and searching Mindset for Functional Athletes. Anywho's, I'll see you soon for another episode of the Mindset RX podcast.